In the last episode, we got this 37-year-old CRX running again. But stopping it, that's a completely different story. With the Integra brake sourced, updated suspension, and way too much confidence, I decided it was time to finally do this right. And what I thought would be a quick Integra brake swap turned into 6 months of missing parts, broken bolts, late nights, and life reminded me that anything worth having is worth working for. Between work, becoming a dad, again, and learning everything the hard way, this episode is about building the foundation, brakes, and suspension, so this car can actually be driven, not just on jack stands. So join me as we upgrade this 37-year-old CRX on a budget, make a few mistakes along the way, and somehow keep this build going.
You guys silly? I'm still gonna send it.
This episode was supposed to be simple. Brand new brakes, fresh suspension, and finally getting the CRX ready for its first ever track day. It was like if life was teasing me, asking me, is this the car you want? If so, the cost of admission is 6 months in patience, completely rearranging your priorities, oh, and some broken bolts and missing brackets. Are you ready? Let's go. Between work, family, and life moving at me like Anthony Joshua's right hook, this build kept getting delayed. You know how it goes. Every time I had a little bit of free time, life said, got it! But brakes and suspension are a non-negotiable for me, because it'll probably stop is not the engineering motto I want to live by. If you haven't seen the last video, in the spring of 2024, I parted out a 1989 Acura Integra and got what I needed to upgrade the CRX brakes the only way I know how to, using what I like to call the Kraken trifecta, where you use OEM parts that deliver somewhat of a performance upgrade and is also budget friendly. Sounds good, right? Except that confidence lasted about 5 minutes. When halfway through disassembling the rear drums, I realized I forgot the caliper brackets. That mistake alone delayed the build by weeks. So if you don't want to be in my situation, here's a list of all the parts needed for your brake swap. What I pulled from the Integra were the front calipers, rear calipers, front sway bar, parking brake cables, master cylinder, and proportioning valve. And what I didn't get was the rear sway bar, rear caliper brackets and hardware, and the rear springs. It's all good. Life moves on. Because somewhere in the middle of all this, Casey Musgraves let us know that we're having another kid.
You're having a boy.
That puts a lot of perspective into things, including how much garage time you don't actually have.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
So now that I know that, instead of waiting, I put my engineering background to the test. I 3D printed my own bracket to test fitment and geometry. And honestly, came out pretty good. The first iteration had to get hacked up, but I think after a few more iterations, we could eventually manufacture something of production quality for all you watching. And just like that, just a few days later, the Honda gods deliver once again with an Integra showing up at a local pick your part. I grabbed the rear hubs and studs, but still managed to forget the rear springs and sway bar. But we'll just let that be a problem for future Frankie. Okay. For now, let's continue on with the rear drum teardown.
The next day.
Step 2 starts once we get these outdated brake drums officially out of the chat. From there, a little modification is needed on the radius arms, but since I'm already replacing the bushings, I decided to pull the entire trailing arm to get a cleaner cut and save myself some future pain. That decision unfortunately meant slightly dropping the fuel tank so the trailing arm bolt could clear. This is exactly why I became an engineer, to minimize frustrations just like this and not create new ones. Since the Integra caliper bracket adds about a 1/4 inch of material, longer studs are a must. The stock CRX ones simply just aren't going to be long enough. So take your time seating the bracket and Integra studs into the beam axle. Line everything up, avoid cross-threading, and pretend every turn of the wrench costs money. Because it does. Once that's done, the fun part can finally begin. The rear hubs, calipers, pads, and rotors can all go on, and now we can start routing the new e-brake cables, which is exactly where my patience goes to The parking brake was easily the most frustrating part of this whole swap. Not because it's complicated, but because Honda decided one of the last bolts to be a Phillips head instead of a hex. A personal attack, honestly. Doing this without dropping the tank is possible, but I wouldn't call it fun. More like a test of patience and vocabulary. I reuse as many of the factory mounting holes as possible, but since the Integra cables are longer, you have to get a little creative with the routing. There's no perfect path here, just do your best to keep things clean and out of the way. With the cables finally in place, the last things to button up on the rear are the remaining bushings for the rear transaxle brace and the rear sway bar. Torque everything to spec, or at least give it a little sip of that blue Kool-Aid. You know, Loctite. From there, we move up front to the engine bay, swap the Integra proportioning valve, and modify the Integra master cylinder bore to match that of the CRX's. I then added a thin layer of RTV gasket just to be safe. Quick disclaimer though, this setup did work for me, but always verify your own application before, sending it. By February of 2025, I finally made it to the front end. But like always, everything fought back. With the rear brakes installed and engine bay complete, we can now get the front of the car on jack stands to tackle the next three things: the front sway bar, brakes, and bushings. Simple, right? First thing we have to remove are the radius arms. And in order to do that, we first have to jack up the car to relieve the tension between the arm and the torsion bar. After that, we should be able to pull the bolts, unless one of them decides to snap, like this one. Like I always say, failures are just excuses for content and to buy new control arms. Then came the sway bar. To remove it, the subframe basically had to come down, the transmission mount, exhaust, and shifter links have to get disconnected, the steering rack comes loose, and the engine bay has to be supported. At one point, I genuinely started running out of jack stands.
I'm still gonna send it.
By the time I was done, the entire front suspension was out of the car, but at least I got brand new radius arms and hardware out of the deal. And if you're like me and you like to follow a Honda service procedure, I'll go ahead and drop it here where you guys can pause and follow along at your own pace. Because at this point, momentum mattered more than perfection, and I was cooking and trying to get the rest of this bushing installed by the time my birthday comes around. But I'm not gonna lie, the sway bar removal almost broke me. Dropping mounts and supporting the engine is one thing, but realizing the new bushings didn't fit when trying to install them sent me straight into a fiery frenzy. At that point, I just wanted the car driving again. So I trimmed the inner diameter until the bushing could actually compress around the sway bar. And honestly, that makes sense. When you upgrade to a thicker sway bar, something is bound to not line up. So after that, I reinstalled the sway bar bushings and hardware and made sure they were installed in the correct order and orientation. Cause if not, you'll be doing it over again. Ask me how I know. I bolted up the subframe and aligned the suspension as best as humanly possible until we could eventually get it over to an alignment shop. Thankfully, I saved the front brakes until the end. Same bolt pattern, just a physically bigger caliper. So it should be a pretty straightforward install. And for the cherry on top, we're going to install all brand new hardware for both the steering rack and the radius arms. And just like that, we're almost ready for full send though. With the tires finally touching the ground, there's only one thing left to do: test drive! And as you might have guessed, the first drive wasn't perfect. Some scraping, some noise, but the brakes worked. That's a win in my book. And speaking of wins, let's recap a couple of the wins we had here. We managed to upgrade our old rear drums to calipers for more stopping power. Replace all the old rubber bushings to polyurethane to improve with handling. Replace all the damaged hardware with brand new grade 8 bolts. And most importantly, we took our time with this build, mainly because we didn't want to end up on the Channel 5 news this afternoon. This episode wasn't about speed. It was about learning from my previous mistakes, staying true to the vision, and never giving up.
I'm gonna win.
It was about finally building a solid foundation for both my life and the CRX. But I'm letting you know right now, we won't stop at just the brakes and suspension. No siree, Bob. Next up, We have the carbon fiber fenders, alignment, and actually driving this thing the way it was meant to be driven. So if this episode helped you or made you feel a little bit less crazy about your own project car, let me know down in the comments down below, because I'm sure there's a lot of other people here that have the same struggles as both you and I. So if you like this episode, make sure to go hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Like always, stay boosted.